I'm going to do something slightly different today than my usual kind of content and talk about what I call my comfort guns. What are my comfort guns? Well, they're vintage rifles that I collect. I just take them out to shoot and have fun a couple times a year usually. They're not meant to be tactical in any way. This is a great example. This is my M1917. So in more recent years, I kind of have plenty of tactical guns, and I've gotten into collecting a few vintage guns because they're not going to be around forever, and they're not going to be around forever at prices that you can get them at today. I think we've all kind of seen that growing up, where the older generations kind of just they had a glut of surplus rifles and things like that, and they were able to buy them extremely cheaply, and that's not really the case any longer. So basically I try and pick up rifles that interest me and I want to preserve the history of a little bit. So with each of these guns that I'm filming, I'm just going to take some shots close up and then also some longer shots, just kind of give you my impressions of shooting it. I like shooting all these rifles, so probably not going to say anything really negative about them. This isn't meant to be like a review of like what you should buy. It's more just like these guns are interesting and I find them interesting and wanted to share them with you guys. So this rifle right here, we'll start off with this because this is my oldest gun that I have. This is my M1917. It's made by Remington. So if you don't know the story of the M1917, during World War I, before the United States really entered the war, the Brits needed more rifles. They couldn't produce enough of their Enfield rifles to cover the massive war that was going on and the losses that they were taking and stuff. So they had contracts in the United States for manufacturers to make Enfield rifles. I think it was called the P14 Enfield, was the ones that were kind of made in the US, that like pattern or whatever. And then once those contracts were finished, they made a couple million rifles, I think, for the Brits. Once those contracts were finished, the United States was getting into World War I at that point and actually starting to send troops over to Europe, and we needed more rifles. And we were using the Springfield 1903 at the time. However, it's a little more complicated gun to manufacture, and because a lot of these manufacturers already had all their tooling set up for making Enfields, what the War Department or whatever it was at the time decided to do was just rechamber them from 303 British, like basically change the tooling slightly from 303 British to 30-06, which was the cartridge that we were using at the time, and then just make essentially a bunch of Americanized Enfields, which became the M1917. So interestingly, even though this was not technically the main rifle of the United States Army at the time, these actually were probably more common on the battlefield at the time in the hands of an actual like doughboy overseas. Honestly, I really like shooting this rifle. I like shooting 30-06 in general. It's a really cool cartridge in my opinion. It's got a lot of history behind it. This rifle actually is also stamped. I think it's like a Canadian like Ordnance Department stamp at a couple of places on it. There's one on this side too. So during World War II, we actually gave a lot of these rifles to Canada to kind of support, I think it's called their home guard, which is like just in case the war ever came to, US and Canadian shores and things like that, they had more rifles to kind of hand out to people and get them in the fight, kind of like a National Guard or something like that for defending the homeland. So not really frontline rifles, but they were used kind of for like backup, like, oh shit kind of stuff in case the war went south. So yeah, this rifle's been around a little bit. I don't know if it was actually used in World War I, but it was definitely manufactured during that time period. Maybe it only got used here stateside, but then went up to Canada and then came back to the United States. I got this through the CMP. I don't know if they still have them. I haven't checked in a while, but yeah, it's pretty sweet. Thing shoots really well. I like the Enfield bolt is super smooth. It's kind of like, it has a lot of resistance, like it's heavy, but it's smooth. It really likes to be run hard and fast, which makes sense for kind of like a battle rifle of the time period. The Brits weren't so concerned about like, oh, I want like a really accurate bolt action rifle. They wanted a bolt action rifle that you could just smash and run really hard. And I think this gun really fits that bill. And it's why the Enfield was used so much by the Brits for so long. All right, let's start off shooting the M1917. So 30-06, we're at about 175 meters. Shouldn't be that hard of a shot. I'm gonna try shooting, kneeling, supported off this tree. Just having a little bit of fun on some plates. we go. Cool thing with the 30-06 is when you hit the steel, you know you fucking hit it. All right, we're gonna shoot up close now. M1917. One thing I did want to talk about is, since the M1917 was based on the P14 Enfield, the P14 Enfield could hold 5 rounds of .303 British in the internal magazine. But since the 30-06 cartridge is a little smaller diameter at the base, it can actually fit 6 rounds in the M1917. So kind of cool that it has an extra round in it. Next up is my Remington 1903 A3. So the M1903 rifle was obviously adopted in 1903, but the A3 models were kind of a World War II specific variant that was slightly easier to manufacture. They kind of simplified a lot of bits on it. Like I think the sights and stuff like that are simplified. The stock's a little like easier. It required less like cutting and woodworking and stuff to make the stocks, just so we could turn out more rifles during World War II essentially. And the 1903 A3s were generally used by kind of like rear support troops and things like that. It wasn't necessarily meant for frontline service. So this one's a Remington. I think I might have already said that, but it's marked on the barrel 11-43. So I'm assuming that's November 1943 is when it was manufactured. This thing's really fun to shoot. It's a little lighter than the M1917 I just showed you guys, and a little more like handy, I would say. I think it's slightly shorter too, maybe by a couple inches, but it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's a little more like maneuverable in the hands. The M1917 is kind of a big heavy rifle, which of that time period, like it makes sense. They're just like fighting in trenches and stuff, but I feel like this is more of like a bolt action rifle that was designed a little more for like maneuver warfare and things like that. You know, I could be totally off base with that, but that's just my impressions from, you know, experiencing how you kind of handle different guns in combat and things like that. This one would be the one that I would want when it comes to maneuver warfare. The M1917, great. You could club somebody to death with it easily because it's nice and heavy. They're both really cool guns, just slightly different philosophies, I think. All right, let's go shoot this thing and see how it does. All right, same distance, about 200 meters here. See how this thing does. There we go. I guess I'm better shooting standing than kneeling. All right, it can fucking hit. All right, now we're gonna shoot the 03 Springfield A3 model, close-ish range, see how running the bolt goes. Pretty smooth. All right, so next gun up is my M1 Garand. So I got this also from the CMP. So it's a CMP expert model. It's got a brand new barrel. That's what that means. And all these, like the receiver and all that stuff was like reparkerized by the CMP. And then it actually came with a brand new stock as well, which was kind of rough. And I actually sanded it down a lot and then coated it with some oil to kind of give that more like vintage looking, kind of like more like it would look back in the day, because the stock that it kind of came with was like the wood was very dry. And I think the idea is that like you can kind of finish it yourself. So that's what I did with this one. Obviously, General Patton called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. This thing is pretty fucking sick. I think this rifle is a very important piece of history because it came about in a time where a lot of the armies that we were facing and even allied armies were still using bolt action rifles. I think having a semi-automatic rifle as like your main service rifle in that time period gave us an overwhelming volume of fire advantage. And then it's something that basically we have forgotten about since then a couple of times. The M14, in my opinion, got outclassed in Vietnam, early Vietnam, by the AK-47, and that's why we had to switch to the M16 to regain that volume of fire superiority. And then apparently we've forgotten that again with the M7 rifle, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm pretty sure it's not going to get adopted into full military service, but despite what a bunch of generals probably want because they're on SIG's payroll or whatever the fuck's going on with that. But yeah, this rifle's fucking sick. Obviously everybody kind of knows about this thing. Shoots really well, really incredibly smoothly actually. I was really surprised when I got that. I never expect like a lot out of vintage surplus guns, older designs, things like that. Frankly, you know, again, to me, it's more about like collecting them and learning about the history and just enjoying shooting them. So I didn't really expect this thing to shoot as well as it does, but this thing is like incredibly smooth shooting it. That really blew me away. And it's actually not just for like the interesting historical factor, but the actual enjoyment of shooting. This is one of my favorite guns to shoot. This is more fun and enjoyable than even some of my ARs and things like that. Like, I love shooting this thing. It's fucking sick. So yeah, if you don't have an M1 Garand, you should probably get one. But yeah, we'll go ahead and shoot this thing and see how it does. I'm sure it's going to do well because it always does. Knock the steel over. So if I didn't mention this already, I'm shooting at about 30-35 meters here for these closer shots. Again, 2 C-zone steel targets. See how the Garand does. Pretty smooth. Like I said, this thing shoots really well. And hopefully you can tell right there why the M1 Garand was such a huge advantage to soldiers versus their European counterparts who were using bolt action rifles for their main kind of mainline rifles. Last but certainly not least, the M1 Carbine. So this is actually the gun, this gun right here is the gun that kind of kicked off collecting other vintage guns, because this one's been in my family for a few generations and been passed down, and I wanted to kind of add to that. So this is kind of what started it all for me. I think the M1 Carbine's really interesting because in some ways it was meant to be like kind of a rear echelon soldier weapon, or like people who are like tankers or something like that, because it's more compact, it's lightweight, you know, it's not as bulky as an M1 Garand. I actually recently, just a few months back, replaced all the springs in it and stuff like that with a spring kit from Fulton Armory, and I got some new fresh mags for it. So this thing's definitely had some issues running in the past, running smoothly, but it's doing better now. Again, it's not a gun that I shoot all the time. I just bring it out for fun. It's a piece of history, so I get to enjoy it in that sense. I don't really expect amazing like reliability out of it, you know. It's been abused a bit, and it's got to be treated a certain way, let's just say. But Really fun to shoot. I love how small and like portable it is. I shot this when I was a kid and stuff like that, so it's a small enough gun that like a kid can shoot, obviously with supervision. So the most interesting thing I think about the M1 carbine is I kind of see it as a spiritual successor to kind of what we use today with M4s and stuff. It's a shorter, lighter rifle with kind of a more intermediate cartridge. Now, their ideas on cartridges and stuff hadn't really they weren't up to where we are today with using kind of like the 5.56 intermediate rifle cartridge. So the 30 caliber 30 carbine cartridge is more of just a larger pistol round versus like a shrunken rifle round like 5.56 is. But I think the overall like form factor and stuff is very much kind of leads into where we went with the M4 and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of an interesting piece of history just in that aspect as well. It's also really interesting to note that we gave these a lot to like Korean forces that were fighting with us in the Korean War, and even Vietnamese, South Vietnamese forces who fought with us. These things were being used by our forces even in Vietnam just because they were so small and portable. Definitely, especially before like the M16 kind of came along and got widely adopted by the Army. And yeah, I think it's a really cool piece of history. So kind of cool to shoot. Doesn't do really amazing at super long distances, again, because it's kind of like an overpowered pistol cartridge. We'll see how it does today. I'm sure I can still hit some stuff. It's still a usable fucking gun, and we're gonna go have some fun with it. Little bonus clip here. I have a CZ82 that I just got recently off of Palmetto State Armory. They were like 180 bucks. They were having a sale, imported obviously. Kind of cool com block pistol. Probably one of the best com block pistols around. It's pretty badass because I feel like a Bond villain shooting it. 9x18 Makarov. It's a double action, single action. It's got a safety, no decocker. So if you want to decock it, you have to do that with a round in the chamber. So, you know, that sketches you out, maybe not the gun for you. Trigger's super nice. Like I said, probably one of the nicest com block pistols you can find out there. Definitely better than the actual Makarov itself. I shot those as well as Tokarevs and a whole bunch of other guns when I did a foreign weapons course when I was in the 75th Ranger Regiment. We would do things like that just to get familiarization with our enemy's weapon systems. But never shot one of these before. This thing is pretty sick, actually. All right, that's all I got for today. Hopefully you guys enjoy kind of seeing these guns. I love shooting them. And hopefully this inspires you guys to maybe go out and get a gun or two that's a little bit of a comfort gun. Go out in the woods, have some fun. Just enjoy the day instead of taking everything so seriously all the time. And yeah, get out there and enjoy.